and welcome to episode 21 of Arbiter of Worlds. Here at Arbiter of Worlds, we study the art and science of running and creating tabletop role-playing games. Last week, I pledged that if this channel hit 1,000 subscribers before today's episode, I would film it in a wizard robe. I got a huge outpouring of support that drove me well above that milestone, so thank you. And as I am a man of my word, this is my wizard robe. Since I'm in a dark robe, today we're going to discuss a dark topic, death. To be more specific, we're going to discuss player character death in the context of my agency theory of fun. As I've said previously, in order for a campaign to effectively create a sense of agency, the players must be able to make real choices that have meaningful consequences on the players and their world. Many GMs never offer real choice because the problem with real choice is that players can only be sure they have real choice when they suffer meaningfully bad consequences from bad choices. And in the context of a tabletop RPG, that usually means permanent destruction of something unique, such as a favorite henchman, a magical artifact, an animal companion, or even the player character himself. For a while, a skilled sleight-of-hand artist can maintain suspension of disbelief about the reality of choice and lead players on a roller coaster ride that makes them think they're making real choices and facing meaningful consequences. But a never-ending string of perfect, dramatically appropriate, fun outcomes that defies probability eventually leads even the dimmest players to realize they don't have real choice at all. And a roller coaster can be a wild ride, but it's still a railroad. And when the railroading gets revealed, the sense of agency dies, and with it dies the sense of fun. And this, then, is the paradox of game mastering. In order to make sure that everybody could have fun, you have to be willing to let the players make choices that lead to results that aren't necessarily fun, including the death of beloved player characters. To put this as bluntly as I possibly can, if player characters cannot die in your campaign from bad choices, your players do not have real agency, and your campaign will never achieve the pinnacle of RPG greatness in the absence of that agency, because player agency is the essence of the role-playing game. Most people rejected his message. They hated the Arbiter of Worlds because he told them the truth. Now, critics of my position tend to take one of three positions of their own. One, that player characters should never die without the player's consent. Two, that player characters should never die unless it's dramatically meaningful. Or three, that player characters should never die through sheer bad luck. And let me respond to each of those in turn. First, let's consider the argument that a player character should never die without his player's consent. This is true, but it's meaningless. Let's imagine I say a person should never be punched without his consent. Does that mean you can't punch someone in a boxing match unless he gives you his permission before each jab? Obviously not. The person has given consent by virtue of entering the ring. So too with an RPG. By playing in an RPG, you consent to abiding by the rules of the game and the objective facts of the world. And if death is part of the deal, death is part of the deal. If you can't handle the risk of your character dying, don't play that game. Go find another hobby that's less emotionally stressful, like day trading. Now let's consider the argument that a player character should never die unless dramatically meaningful. This argument presupposes this Forge-like philosophy of story gaming, where drama is defined relative to some preconceived narrative that has an independent existence separate from the game world. It also presupposes that dramatic meaning can be evaluated in a manner that people can agree on. But neither of these things is true in an agentic open-world campaign. There is no narrative plotted in advance. There are merely events that occur over time. And there is no way to evaluate what is or isn't meaningful because meaning is only revealed retroactively. An open world has unknown unknowns. Who can say what a death means? Let's turn to the third argument, that a player character should never die through sheer bad luck. This one is also arguably true, but also meaningless. If you're running a sandbox campaign with an objective world that abides by clear rules, then no outcome that occurs is ever just bad luck. Every outcome is the result of choices the players have made, choices of where to adventure, choices of how to arrange their marching order, choices of what precautions to take, and on and on. A player will zoom in on a 5-second moment of play and complain that its outcome is bad luck, even though it comes at the tail end of countless deliberate choices. I don't find any of those three positions very persuasive. To me, the most surprising thing about this debate is that it's even a debate. No one who is serious about poker thinks that poker would be improved by removing betting. Without the possibility of losing all your money, the game is not the same. No one who is serious about wargaming thinks that wargaming would be improved by guaranteeing that your army always wins the campaign. But many allegedly serious RPG hobbyists really take it as a personal offense if the possibility of death is presented in the campaign, and they do not react well if their PC actually dies. Where does this outrage about the possibility of player character death come from? I believe that the angst over PC death arises from three causes, all related to practices of play. The first cause is a misunderstanding of what a role-playing game is. A role-playing game is not a story game. It is not an exercise in interactive storytelling. It is not an improv session with friends, nor is it an excuse to force others to cater to your melodramatic power fantasies or barely disguised fetishes. No. It is a game in which you assume the stance of a character in a world and do your best to meet the challenges that that world confronts you with. I've done a half dozen episodes on this point, so I'm not going to belabor it further. The second cause is the widespread but dishonest practice of fudging the dice. If you believe that the GM is fudging the dice to steer outcomes to his desired end state, then if your PC dies, the implication is either he fudged the dice to kill your PC on purpose, or he didn't fudge the dice when he could have, and he let your PC die on purpose. Either way, it creates a profound sense of unfairness. And the only way to alleviate that sense of unfairness is, say it with me, never fudge the dice. The third and final cause is the once widespread practice of maximizing the player's misery when his character dies. Christian cartoonist Jack Chick offered up a melodramatic example of this when he has Marcy, one of the players, become visibly upset after her thief character misses a poison trap. The dungeon master declares her dead. She jumps up from the table, crying out for help, and the GM tells her, "Marcy, get out of here. You're dead. You don't exist anymore." While Chick is exaggerating, he's not entirely misguided in his presentation of gamer culture in that scene. In the foreword to Tomb of Horrors, Gary Gygax wrote, "Had I been mean and cruel, I would have required participants to hand over their character sheets upon the demise of a PC, torn them up, and then smiled wickedly as I asked for the name and address of their DM so as to pass on the news of the sad loss. But I am very kind at heart," says Gary. Cursory search of RPG forums will find countless anecdotes of GMs who, unlike Gary, weren't kind and did relish in the cruelty of the kill, mocked the dead player, destroyed the character sheet, and on and on. As a teenager, I myself saw GMs tear up character sheets of beloved PCs right in front of me. And I saw players freak out over it. And it was made all the worse by the old school values that required everyone to restart at 0 XP. Now, I am as firm a believer in actions have consequences as any GM around. But I'm going to state for the record that death should not be handled in a way that maximizes player unhappiness. In fact, doing so is a betrayal of the values of your game world. What do I mean by that? Well, according to today's atheistic and materialistic worldview, death is the end. You live once, and when you die, you cease to exist. There's no soul, there's no afterlife, there's no reincarnation. And when Jack Chick has his character say, "Marcy, you're dead, you don't exist anymore," he's actually assuming that in the world of RPGs, there is no afterlife. And when a GM tears up your character sheet and mocks you for losing by dying, he's assuming the same thing. But both are wrong. The vast majority of human beings in history didn't think this way, especially not the brave adventurers. Greek heroes didn't fear death. Glorious death was a means of achieving the undying glory that led to apotheosis. Viking warriors did not fear death on the battlefield. They sought it out that they could reach Valhalla. Knights Templars didn't fear dying to the Saracen, for they knew that heaven waited on the other side. And the vast majority of fantasy campaign settings don't work that way either. Whether you're playing in Blackmoor, Greyhawk, The Forgotten Realms, my own Arn Empire setting, a setting of your own creation, it's virtually certain that death is not the end. In fact, virtually every edition of D&D has presumed there's an afterlife to which deceased souls go. And we know that because it has afforded player characters with spells like Raise Dead that can reunite the soul with its body and return the dead to life. And in general, Raised Dead and all its variants is the main way that fantasy RPGs handle character death. In fact, in some games, it's become so prevalent that death becomes a mere bump in the road towards level 20, which is a trend that is nowhere so visible as in massively multiplayer RPGs and computer RPGs. Now, what's interesting about this way of handling death, about this Raised Dead mechanic, is that it is far more prevalent in RPGs than it is in myth, in religious belief, even in fantasy fiction. In the entire Bible, it's so rare it only happens twice. In Greek myth, some heroes become demigods or constellations after they die, but almost nobody comes back to life as a mortal on our plane of existence. Even Orpheus couldn't make it happen for his beloved wife. In Middle-earth, there's one mortal restored to life in the whole canon, which is Beren. In Westeros, Beric Dondarrion and Jon Snow. It's just rare in every medium. And your Knight Templar, Samurai, Mujahideen, Viking, none of them risk their lives thinking their buddy Bob is going to raise them back from the dead. No, they risked their lives because they believe in something that transcends this life, which is a very different mentality. And yet that mentality, which is both historical and fictional, is almost entirely absent from the entire culture of play of RPGs. Most players play their characters as if they were atheist materialists for whom death is the end, even though the character is religious and knows that death is not the end. In other words, in a world where the Elysian Fields and Valhalla are real, the typical player seems to fear his character's death more than the character fears his own death. And if you step outside the confines of the hobby and you think about it, that's very strange. In the process of developing the Adventure Conquer King System Imperial Imprint, the upcoming second edition of my RPG, I've been thinking a lot about how to address this. How do we create a game where death is still a meaningful consequence, where Raised Dead doesn't trivialize death, but where death is also not necessarily a tragedy? How can we design a game where, under the right circumstances, the incentives are there to encourage heroism, to reward that Viking hero for dying gloriously rather than dying in his sleep of old age? How can we create a game where a player might rationally choose, as a matter of gameplay, to have his character make a decision that's likely to lead to death, knowing that the character won't be raised from the dead, will be gone forever, but still knowing it's the right choice in the game? How do we balance the mechanics of death with the mechanics of returning from death and the mechanics of not returning from death? My solution to this dilemma is going to be the discussion of next week's video. For now, please be sure to end this video on death by morbidly clicking the like and subscribe buttons and adding a gloomy, melancholic comment. And remember, only now at the end do you understand. Fuck! I don't find any of those positions very persuasive. In fact, to me, the most surprising thing about this debate is that it's even a debate. No one who is serious about poker thinks that poker would be improvised.